we're back. Oh no. Okay, we're here. Hi, everyone. Welcome to day one of Tales of the Cocktail. This is a seminar called Managing with Mental Health in Mind. My name is Laura Green. This is Hank. He's going to be living on my lap and driving me a little bit crazy. But yeah, this seminar today is talking about mental health and what you can do in your workspaces to support individuals' mental health. Yes, nailed it. So like I said, my name is Laura Green. I am a licensed therapist and have worked in hospitality for nearly 20 years, which makes my stomach turn literally every time I say that, because I can't believe I've been here this long. But yeah, I'm a licensed therapist out of Chicago, Illinois, and my research interests include the mental health of individuals in hospitality. So that being said, even though I am a therapist, this is not therapy. This is more along the lines of psychoeducation and leadership education. There are some resources that I'm going to put in the chat right now. The first one is from Not 9 to 5. These are some resources that come from Canada and cover Canada and the States. Some resources from me at Healthy Poor. Copy. Wait, I hit the wrong one. Sorry, this is going great if you need help. So this covers the United States, and then some resources from the Burnt Chef Project. Cool. So I think now's a good time to go around and have you all introduce yourselves, my fantastic panelists today. Hi, Robin. Okay, cool. Who wants to start? Anybody? Dick. Oh, no.
Ladies first.
Oh, that's so polite. Sure, I'll start. I'm Hassel Aviles. I am coming to you from Toronto, Canada, and I'm the co-founder of Not 9 to 5. I grew up in this industry, more front of house based, and I'm really excited to be part of this conversation with all of you. Oh, and sorry, I should talk a little bit. Sorry, Not 9 to 5, for anyone that doesn't know, is a nonprofit organization that is focused on empowering hospitality workers around mental health and substance use support.
Also, I guess
nailed it.
I guess I'll go next. Dick Loveless coming to you live from Delaware. If you don't know anywhere that's at, it's nowhere. It's just Delaware. And no, grew up with family, like owning restaurants, from cooking to bartending to management, opening up bars. Also, over the past 10 years, I've done mobile intensive outpatient treatment with at-risk youth and their families. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Very passionate about, hospitality, improving the quality of people's lives around me. And currently I work as for offsite events and spirit marketing as their research coordinator. And then just recently finished up the doctoral degree in organizational learning, leadership, and innovation. And I've never been to a Tales. This was supposed to be my first year. So this is a big honor. I appreciate you guys. Everyone on here is the rock stars, and just looking forward to it. So thank you guys.
Nice. My name's Kris Hall. So I'm from United Kingdom, specifically a place called Somerset, where you drink cider and you've got the Wurzels. I run an organization, a non-profit over here called the Burnt Chef Project, which is a mental health awareness campaign and an e-commerce platform which raises awareness for mental health, destigmatizes mental health within the UK hospitality trade. But we have recently, over the last 6 months, seen that spread to places like Tokyo, Canada, America, Europe, even Australia. So we're here basically just to educate, make sure that people are building their resilience and hopefully try and change the industry
Awesome.
for
So
better.
I think we can first start by talking about mental health, what mental health is, and what makes it such a challenge. My gosh, what makes it such a challenging thing to tackle within our industry? Something that I often run into when we talk about mental health is that people immediately associate it with mental health disorders or experiencing mental health issues, when the reality is, when we talk about mental health, everything encompasses our mental health. So not just brain chemistry, but also environment, like environment in the immediate sense, like an interpersonal sense, or also within a social environment, which includes the workspace. So experiencing, different kinds of relationships or relationships of certain natures, including like larger social issues. So like racism, sexism, any other kind of negatively impactful prejudice that we might put on other people. Everything and all of that contributes to our mental health, including all of these also micro behaviors around, like, say, asking for help, which is something that we especially struggle in our industry. Kris, do you want to speak a little bit to kind of what makes our industry especially susceptible to experiencing mental health issues?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's unique to the UK over here. I think it's worldwide, but the stigma attached to mental health is stifling, it's suffocating. And one thing that we found certainly over here, specifically, we started off with chefs, but we've opened up the demographic much more to everyone now, because mental health isn't unique to one particular race, creed, color, sex, whatever it might be. And what we have found is that there's just no awareness, there's no training, there's no education over mental health here, especially within hospitality. There's this term badge of honor gets used a lot, and we tend to find that for fear of being singled out or being fired from the workplace, people aren't putting their hand up and saying, I have anxiety, or I'm struggling at the moment with depression, and I'm not able to. Health and safety guidelines over here actually say that mental health can be classified as a disability if it's for any longer than 6 months, which, as you know, bouts of depression and PTSD and those sort of mental illnesses tend to go on for much longer than that. But again, it's not widely known. People don't talk about it that frequently, and as a result, they'll take days off sick for a poorly stomach when it could be the fact they can't physically get out of bed because of their mental illness. So it's been tough trying to fight through that, but I think we as an industry worldwide are starting to see a significant change with this. I think conversations are starting to change, but we've got a long way to go to update this.
And really. Like, Dick, what have you seen, within your work with hospitality around what makes, especially if we're going to bring the conversation to the workplace, what makes people especially susceptible to experiencing challenges?
I think especially over here in America, which is like to Kris's point, the awareness is starting to get there, and we're starting to figure out the what, and now we're trying to figure out the why and kind of create some of those things. But really, it just comes down to the environment and culture. For the hospitality, restaurant, and bar industry, it's some of those old practices are just co-opted from other places, and it's sort of like you bring in those residual effects. And some of them are, as whether it's, you're dealing with racism, sexism, so many things can go on. It's really about like the environment and the culture here. So for me, just seeing that is being able to see like education being put out there. And then I think the next big, thing we're trying to all get to, which we'll get to later, is, hey, in organizations, like when we figure out what's going on with mental health, like then do we have the will to act on it? And then like something I'm just going to nail home today is just, systems equals change. It's not enough just to know what's going on, but to sit there and how are we going to fix it and just start getting boots on the ground and really helping people everywhere. And it's also about resources and education we'll go into, but it's kind of where I'm seeing it. But it's encouraging to see, talks like these, conversations going on. I really feel like stigma across different sectors. People are really starting to embrace people. And obviously it'll come up today about creating cultures that encourage vulnerability, encourage people to be open, and creating those dialogues that are going to help just bury the stigma and just really become seeing each other more as human beings. So that's kind of what I've seen and where I think it's going,
you bring up a good point. Something I sort of stumbled on within my own experience of working behind the bar is, you said seeing each other as human beings. There's such a culture within our industry of dehumanization, not only from the guests that visit our restaurants or bars or, whatever, but it happens internally in restaurants as well. So to a guest coming in, we see this sort of thought that we're just fixtures in their experience, as opposed to human beings that are creating an experience for them with like thoughts and feelings and things like that. but also within the culture of restaurants, this industry has one of the highest turnover rates. And I know that the Bureau of Labor Statistics in 2018, their report said that we have a 74% turnover rate. That's huge. Like, healthy turnover should be 10 to 15%. So there's this sort of transient culture about this industry that is sort of accepted and encouraged, where really what I want to see is more people kind of putting down roots in a place and growing there. And to do that, we have to humanize our industry, individuals who work in the industry a little bit more. But also we have a coping problem. With that dehumanization, it's such a high stress situation all the time. And then you have like this Escoffier we chef culture that is further dehumanizing, so we have coping issues as well, that we're not really coping very adaptively and healthily. Not 9 to 5 did some research around substance use. Can you speak a little bit to that, Hassel?
Sure. Yeah, of course. So not 9 to 5. Yeah, we've done our own research in terms of having hospitality workers fill out certain surveys. One thing I did want to mention as well is just even when asked, do you live with any challenges to your mental health and or substance abuse, 90% say yes. So I think the real thing to point out is that it's an epidemic rate of mental health crisis and substance use. It's not casual. And obviously that leads to, validating your point, Laura, about the fact that coping mechanisms, are part of that. So you have people leaning on specific coping mechanisms. But I would actually say the reason why our industry is at such high risk is because we normalize and we glamorize certain coping mechanisms. So it's not just that some people dabble in substance use, it's that we're rewarding our team with substances. So what that does is that it makes it a very natural, normal thing, to say, we had a great day, let's go have a pint, or we got rocked and we had a terrible service, let's go have a pint. Like either way, you're indulging. And I think that part of that comes from the brigade system, mentality of, you don't really get to have individualistic thinking. You kind of follow the pack, and it's a hierarchy, and you have to follow the system. And so if you're being told that this is the way it goes, then you don't question it. And the problem with that is that it really stifles innovation. It really stifles creativity. It really, blocks out vulnerability. You're no longer creating an environment where people are allowed to think for themselves or share something that's different than everybody else. And so, yeah, our surveys have definitely shown that. But even just myself growing up in this industry, honestly, that's what I saw too. So we did the surveys to kind of validate what we were already experiencing first. And it's fascinating because even this global conversation is just validates that this is a global issue and it's a human issue, and it's not just particular to our own individual community.
There was a lot there. Who was going to say something just then? Sorry. Kris? Yeah.
I think Kris
Go ahead. No, go.
What's that? Sorry? I was just going to jump in there. I totally agree with you on the fact that it's there's almost a suppressive culture when you get into hospitality now, which states that if you don't play along with the big boys, then you get ostracized. You'll never make a career for yourself, right? And I think when you look at where the Escoffier system came from originally, certainly within the kitchen environment, it's a militant system. It's from a military background. Escoffier was in the military, brought it into hospitality, and that's why it's learned behavior. Now, I was chatting to a friend of mine who recently came into the trade, and he said recently left the trade. He's in his mid-30s now, and he's retired from being a chef. He got in London, 17 years old, and the first thing that he got told after a shift is, right, come on in, lad, I'll take you down the pub. And like, right, knock that pint back, knock another one back, knock another one back. Right, now, how much can you drink? Like, are you one of the boys? And it was that sort of mentality that ended up him getting on later on in life and having issues with that, because he thought, well, that's just the way things are. And in order for me to fit in, I have to be socially reckless, yet hold it together in a professional environment. So you touched on a great point there.
Yeah, and jumping into yours 100%, it's just a learned master behavior. And honestly, like coming from just a passion about organizational development and understanding structures, I think the hospitality and restaurant and bar industry is now going to be like slamming those hierarchies. They're going to be going to more matrix, more team based, and it's really about unlearning these behaviors and just creating new standards. But then also like a key thing that I've always nailed home as a kid is like behavior is something you do every day. And we need to start doing different behaviors, and then we need to focus on mastering like those behaviors. And then you'll start to see change. Like that's how you create a new culture. But you guys hit it right on the head.
All of that being said, and it's also funny, like having, not like funny, haha, but having this conversation, I'm, like Kris, how you mentioned like entering the industry and going out and having pint after pint, like I'm having memories of like my early days in the industry of like we would get slammed at the bar and then we would duck down and do a shot of like overproof rum. And the outcome was that it worked. I was able to calm down. So then there's evidence that these behaviors, these coping mechanisms are effective, but they're not healthy and they're not adaptive, and they don't really help you to grow, especially with the substance use. But I want to bring up, I've heard throughout this so far, vulnerability, and I heard creativity, independent thinking, being able to speak up, so these are all pieces that fall under creating a space that is psychologically safe. Dick, I should have asked you this before, are you comfortable speaking to Amy Edmondson's work around psychological safety, or I can
Yes, and definitely. If you haven't seen like Brene Brown's talk on vulnerability, like I said, I think it's about we'll talk about it later about psychoeducation. People gotta be educated. They gotta have a vocabulary to be able to talk about what's going on in our cultures and figuring out behavior wise like what's happening. But I think it's also once you get that education, and we all once you have the vocabulary. It's not about people coming in and doing it. It's about you need people within inside the organization, the restaurant, the bars, to them to be able to lead it, to be able to champion that. And it's also understanding like one of the big things is becoming self-aware. You need to know where you stand for, what's your leadership style, what are your issues, and then how that impacts the people around you. And once you can have everyone come to that common ground, you sort of make almost like a mental map of what's going on in your restaurant and bar, then that's basically the first step of you got your education, you understand where everyone's at, and then you can start creating those platforms that become a system that then start like uprooting those old mentality, those old thoughts. And that's how I think that's where we're at. I think that's where we're going to be able to start really like mental health. I hope within the next couple of years, and it's so encouraging so far, is it's not some defining thing. It's not some like shame. It's, people start wearing it as a badge and people start seeing each other, like we said. And the biggest thing that I think you're talking about vulnerability is you're going to be able to close that empathetic gap between people, and you're just going to be able to have real conversations and dialogue. So that's kind of what I've seen. And like I said, if you haven't heard of Brene Brown and watched some of the stuff on vulnerability, like, please, it's incredible. She's amazing. I'm a TED Talk nerd, but if anyone else wants to start somewhere, definitely get you
for sure.
going
and a lot of her
fired
work now. So if you don't know who Brene Brown is, she's a social worker. She studies shame and vulnerability. And her work around vulnerability is absolutely incredible. But this book just came out. Her work has mostly taken life in organizations and leadership. So then she wrote this book. Really, really recommend it. And then so I'm trying to tie things together with this too. So within the workplace, the ability to speak up and provide feedback to management is a very integral piece when we start talking about mental health, which is something that we don't have right now actively. To your point, as an active system to be able to provide feedback. And we're also not very good at receiving feedback, right? So how, like, I'll just open this up to all of you. How do you think that looks? So if we're going to put this sort of like vulnerability, feedback, creativity into action, what does that look like?
I'll start if everyone. I think the best thing and the best analogy I can give it to is when we're in restaurant and bars. I can remember you guys practice service. You would mock it up, you would role play it, and you would do it all the time, whether it's making drinks, whether it's greeting a guest. Take that same mentality and that platform and do it when it comes to communication. And because we all do it, even I remember the best restaurants and bars I've been in, we would role play what terrible service looks like. So you know what it looks like and feels like versus good service. I think that's one of the things where you're going to be able to start creating those systems where every single day you're talking about it. And then like going back to about once we understand where we're at and then having the will to act, I think it's a great thing to start looking at restaurants and bars to have a dual bottom line where, yes, we need to make money and we need to create service, but then another one could be fully releasing human possibility in our restaurants and bars or creating something. So we define success and we have the audacity to say we're not successful if we just make this money. We're also successful if, you know, the people in our organizations are heard, they're treated humanely. And I think if you put that up on the bar and challenge, you know, ourselves and me as well and anybody, that you're going to create that goal where you're like, all right, it's not just one thing. Like we define success by this definition in these terms. So like a dual bottom, hell, you could have tri bottom line if you want. But I think if you put it up there, up at that top of that mountain, it makes everyone accountable.
Sure. And it puts like decisions. You know, there's something I put out just recently on Instagram talking about making mental health a priority within your decision-making processes, right? So when you are designing what the line looks like in the kitchen, what the back bar looks like, or whatever, thinking, how is this going to, you know, do the job, but be efficient, but also like kind to someone's body. Make it that they don't have to take 3 steps every time to get this, that it's a little bit more efficient. Those little micro pieces, like just the stress of the job is really thoughtful. And then practicing putting mental health at the forefront of like what the applications look like, right? What the employee restroom looks like, what kind of toilet paper you're using, like, you know, how those pieces play into someone's experience. And then even like the bigger pieces along the lines of like how you manage examining hiring processes and all of that. What were some, yeah?
I just wanted to add a couple things to what was said. So I love that we're talking about vulnerability because it's actually essential to psychological safety. You can't actually have psychological safety if people don't feel vulnerable to be in front of one another. So, I think at first, though, when you hear, or people from our industry that have grown up in this industry hear vulnerability, they're like, no, thanks. I'll pass.
Yep.
I'm good on that front. And, Brene shows the reason why it's important and how it's contagious. But I think we also need to understand that it's what makes people feel comfortable to do it themselves. And so I think, when you're talking about what does success look like, or what do our teams look like, or KPIs, or any of these kinds of ways to like assess our environment, I think part of it is like practicing vulnerability and role playing vulnerability, like you were saying earlier, role playing certain things. And I think, on top of that, I think it's so important to note that like the people in positions of leadership have that ability to influence. So if the people that are managers or owners or whoever has influence on the environment aren't actually role modeling that, it's really hard for everyone else to kind of, get on board. I would say that like, I love everything that's being said. And the only other book, like I love Dare to Lead. I love Brene Brown. The other one that I would also throw in there is Simon Sinek, Leaders Eat Last.
Dear to my heart. So good.
Because I think like both those books, if all the managers and owners in this industry read both those books and actually started to work with those principles, we would literally have an entirely different industry. Because what happened for too long is this like, I'm in it for myself mentality. So anyways, I love everything that's being said, and I just wanted to add those few things.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. There is a chef actually in America, and the name escapes me now. I was reading an article about it about a year ago, who had designed a restaurant purely around his staff's well-being. And when he designed it, he was designing meditation rooms. He designed and implemented a menu that meant that his staff got to choose the menu based on how stressed it would make them feel during a busy period. And if it was stressful, they would get rid of it and they would make something simpler. And that was their entire business model. It was about decent working conditions. It was about putting the members of staff first in terms of their well-being, and everything else, fuck it. If we make money, we'll make money, which is a very flippant remark to make. But I think when you actually start to look at the stats and look at the amount of money that's been spent on trying to retain staff, training up new staff. I mean, hospitality has a terrible reputation for just flying through bodies like they're cannon fodder, but they're not, they're people. And each of those people have a price attached to them. And there's a study done by Deloitte that actually said that if employers were investing and started investing in mental health, there was at the very minimum a 3-to-1 return, a 5-to-1 on average, even going up to 11-to-1 return on their investment. And it's just like, stop looking at the next 5 minutes, stop looking at the next hour, start looking at 3 months down the line, and then we'll start to see the business models change and learn that.
Yeah, and to your point, you're talking about transparency, and that's an incredible thing. But also, I think what's out there too, which is something that I'm a passion for and is doing, is people are like, okay, well, how do we measure that? You can. There's qualitative ways. There's interviews. There are assessments. I mean, we can. There are so many ways to make metrics and measure where your mental health is. Do people feel safe? So I think you're removing that stigma too, because I know that thing is early, because a lot of people now want the qualitative. They want the why. We understand the what, but I don't understand what's behind it. And I think taking that anxiety away too is like, yes, we can put those metrics up. We can measure it. We can show how everyone is doing, how everyone's feeling, depending on how they define it. But to your point though, transparency it's huge. It has dividends that people kind of underestimated. Mm-hmm. So that was an amazing point you made.
I did a little bit of, sorry, go ahead.
It's so true. No, I was just going to say it's so true, because for too long, like, labor is seen as a problem line item in the budget. Yeah. And it's a percentage that you're trying to get down, when that makes absolutely no sense. It's actually something that's an asset. People are assets. We're not a problem line item. So you can't complain about employee retention and then not.
That's exactly right. And I was doing some research looking at retention and looking at why people leave their jobs. Like, just to at the end of the day, what I want to be able to do is create, to work with folks to create interventions so that we can apply them to the workplace within our industry and see people thrive and grow. Because right now in our industry, people are actively suffering because of the job, and that is like, that's not cool, and that can't continue. And we've seen the ramifications of what that is. But also, I'm kind of tangenting now, but that also starts to move into, like, when people move into brand jobs or distribution, those cultures seep out because we all have this sort of underlying foundation of these kinds of behaviors and culture. But what I found, and there's a bunch of research from Cornell, a lot of private resource agencies doing this kind of work, is that it's not that people are leaving because of their pay, let's say. People will sacrifice pay to work in a great environment. They're leaving because there's not opportunity for growth. They are leaving because their overall life satisfaction isn't there. I don't really like to use the term work-life balance, because it implies putting life into your work when you should be putting your work into your life, But, there's not a lot of opportunity for growth. There's not a lot of life satisfaction, work-life balance. Managerial issues, like not getting along with your manager, not feeling like you're growing, or you're not going to be promoted or get anything out of it. So these are easy things that you can intervene with to say, okay, what are we doing in terms of education in the workplace? Are we getting our teams, our personnel out there to be able to share what their experience is like here? Are we taking that data and acting on it? My cats are fighting. Sorry, I don't know if you all can hear that. What else can you think of? What are some actionable things that managers can do right now just, and I guess there might be two parts to this. Oh, wait, there's one more thing I want to say in terms of the money. In terms of your turnover costs are anywhere from like 20 to 80% of what their annual salary will look like. Okay, so when you're looking at investing into your employees and where that money is going to come from, if you can increase your retention, you are saving so much money, and not just from like the training costs or like the meals or cocktails or whatever that you have to buy in order to keep that person. You're losing efficiency. You're losing a team dynamic. You're losing maybe business from guests that aren't coming back because you're understaffed. You're losing that sort of like one more glass of wine reorder. But again, so there's a lot of costs that go into turnover that if you can invest in your staff, invest that money into your staff, and then retain that staff, your restaurant or bar or organization is going to be so much more flush financially and give you a little bit more wiggle room. I mean, now it's kind of, I realize now that it might be a little insensitive to say that right now, but thinking about caring for people at the forefront, it's going to save you money in the long term. But Dick, what else can you think of that people can do like right now during COVID and sort of in general?
I think the first thing is obviously we have the resources and links to get the education. But the first thing, the ground thing is look at your training programs, what you have, and say, we need to make some training, or we need to make spaces, platforms to be able to work on mental health. And I would say to fold into that, that's going to help is figuring out leadership development, developing wherever your managers are, your leaderships, even those lead bartenders, people on the ground level, because a position is not going to define if you're a leader. You need to identify those, and then start really practicing it. I preach this, and it's been one of the things that's changed my life. Is practice reshapes behavior. We are going to master what we need to get better at. And also a thing that will help along with that is start asking questions like, what have we mastered already that's bad behavior? And what have we been rationalizing away? And I think if you get to that point, you get your education, you understand where you're at and where you need to go. And then, like I said, start making those trainings, make it a system, and start implementing it. And obviously they'll have resources today, whether it's bringing in, somebody that they trust to help them with it, or, someone on the panel, whatever it is. But it's really, at the end of the day, it's not about what someone's going to come in and teach you to do. It's going to be how you're going to carry it on. It has to be something every single day. And the best way I can do is what's working into your fundamentals. We all come into our businesses and organizations. There are fundamental things that we do every single day that are the bedrock, the foundation of how we're going to move forward and what's going to steer us through the day. And those were some things that I think that you could just start doing right now, or put in the forefront to make it just really actionable, and start to measure and start to get where you want to be. And at the end of the day, I think that's a good start, and it helps you define it, and you start making each other accountable.
I think the
for it as
accountability
well.
piece is absolutely key, and that comes from management teams, like the dynamic between the people in leadership, and also empowering people to think outside of the systems that we've already mastered, as you said. And that's also where feedback from your staff is going to play a huge role, because they're going to be masters of their own experience, right? And if they're experiencing something in the workplace that isn't conducive to their well-being, we should be encouraging them to explore that and then receiving that feedback of what we can do differently. And also, the more minds like putting themselves into a problem and trying to understand the problem, the more perspectives you get. And then you have a culture that celebrates all different kinds of perspectives from different people of different areas within that organization. Kris, you have those worksheets that you put together around management and like personal care with that. Can you speak a little bit to those?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to what you're saying as with regards to a lot of the managers nowadays out there don't really fully understand the topic of the conversation. whether that's through their mental health being quite positive and not having any mental illness, or whether or not the fact that they just don't understand the situation. But the packages I put together, including the action plans, it's almost an open format, and although it's not anonymous, it allows employees to write down how they're feeling and actually dictate the way that the management structure should work for them, rather than a manager trying to pick things out of the air when they're not sure. And I think that's important. I mean, obviously it requires a little bit of probably a little bit of foresight with regards to how you do it, because if you're letting employees manage themselves completely, then you could have, I need 5 days off a week, in which case then there's suitability for roles. But I think you do, there has to be an onus on the employee to actually say, look, here's an open format. Whatever you say is private within this format, and ultimately, if you're indicating to me that you have anxiety within this certain situation, then it's my job as a manager to make sure that reasonable adjustments are put in place to make sure that that is mitigated or reduced as much as possible. And ultimately, it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, is to create a workforce that's with us for not just 1 year, 2 year, but to actually, for hospitality, to have a 4-year, 5-year retention, and for only that person to move on when they say, I have learned all I can, you guys were fantastic, and I'm only moving on because I'm a much better level than I was when I started, and thank you for that. And that's the goal. That's the gold standard
right now. People are just like, boom, 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 go ahead.
Yeah. And I'll give a great example too about making practices that will make you accountable. There's a tech company, and they made an internal practice that you can never be fired from this company for performance issues. They will coach you, they will train you, and they put the onus back on the employee. And some of the retention and some of the experiences and stories that they've taken from it has just been incredible. Because a lot of the things I think when we talk about organizations or where we're at, we all have those procedures of corrections or trainings, but usually they're maybe geared towards getting people out or getting people away from that position, rather where you're coming to them, understanding whether it's about performance, anxiety, mental health. It's somebody saying, come here, come to me, and we're going to coach you and we're going to train you and we're going to get you the help where you need to be so you can perform in this position at top. And at the end of the day, I think it's about creating I'm going to borrow this acronym, but it's about creating environments that remove obstacles and promote engagement. You know what I mean? Removing those obstacles and having a dialogue and having those systems that promote engagement and promote, a healthy trail to where you guys need to be. So that's a great point you pointed out.
Will help also. I think burnout is such a tremendous problem within our industry, and all of the systems that we're talking about too will mitigate that burnout. A little bit about burnout for the folks at home. I think often we regard burnout as we confuse burnout and chronic stress, but that's not exactly what it is. Burnout definitely can come from extreme stress, but burnout we're finding actually is created because there's not a quality exchange. There's not equal exchange. It's when you feel like you're putting out more than you're getting back. So I call healthy poor because it's helping pour from a full cup. It's when you are depleted empty. Other ways that you can mitigate burnout are appreciating your staff and ensuring that they feel appreciated, that the perception of the organizational support is there. And you can do this by giving them educational opportunities, praising folks for attempting to try something new or engaging, or there's also something called one of my favorite psychological phenomenon is called the fair process effect. That if people have input, if people either have a say in the decision or the say in how the decision happens, they're going to be happier overall. If we are sort of ruling with an this and just saying this is what it is, you have to fall in line, that decreases people's happiness and satisfaction. So the fair process effect, if you're designing a cocktail mix, either the team can have input into that design or choose which ones go through at the end. And Kris, you were sort of speaking to that phenomenon a little bit when talking about the restaurant that the chef this is these are our options with the menu, or how do we change this, how do we make this more efficient? Like, that's incredible. Because also the other thing with burnout is once burnout sets in, there's not like a treatment for it. Like the treatment is to change your job and to like go somewhere else. And that symptom that we experience, like I always give the example of like when I'd be at the bar and like the most lovely couple would sit down and they seem like they're having a great time, and pardon the language and swear, but I would be like, get the fuck out of here. That's when I would know that burnout was starting to set in, because the dehumanization, that cynicism was starting to come out in my behavior. And I'd be like, oh, getting burned out, right? So all of these managerial practices are going to help mitigate that.
There's an interesting book called Lost Connections by Johan Haring. He's a British journalist or ex-journalist who went on a 40,000-mile trip to investigate the causes of depression and anxiety, because he was basically going down this journey of taking antidepressants since he was 18, and they started to lose their effect. And he wanted to find out exactly what it was. And he chalked down that the reasons for anxiety and depression were related to 9, or in his theory, 9 different reasons, 2 of which were biological, and the other 7 were down to their environmental conditions. And when you start to look at that and apply that to the hospitality workplace, your point about not having control, not having security, not having your tribe, or an environment where you can feel safe and comfortable, all these sort of things where actually it's not just 1 or 2 within the hospitality environment, it's multiple things that have been lost, and they're not being replaced at all. They are being replaced by drugs, alcohol, and just self-abuse, really. So it's an interesting point, and you are right. And there are people out there who are making chef shareholders, making bar managers and mixologists shareholders as well, to say you have a responsibility in this company and you have a role that's valued within this company. And that sense of ownership provides such a relief from burnout, stress, and also anxiety. But it also, on the flip side, can cause a higher level of ownership. So it's a very fine line to tread.
I wanted to add one thing too, just that, like, I think that that's such a good point about involving people in, that are maybe not management level yet, or that are maybe entry level or other level of workers, into shaping the culture, shaping the environment, and not having a part and just having to do what you were told, or this is just the way we do things, is super, super harmful and has actually kept us in the same position for centuries. I mean, this has been going on for so long. This isn't new. And we're trying to move the dial on this conversation, but I totally agree that you need to involve people. But I think that, to involve people, I think we also need to consider a couple things. So a lot of times people are put into management positions because they're literally just the only person that's still working there. Mm-hmm. So it's not that you have management training, and it's not that you're even given these opportunities. So I think one thing that's not being said is like that, in terms of training, that's not being said is that, when you become a manager in this industry, there needs to be not just like maybe money put in or training put in or books recommended, but there needs to actually be a structure to get to involve them into. And a lot of times there isn't one. There just is like survival mode. And obviously survival mode leads to burnout. The other thing I wanted to add was that with burnout is that burnout requires recovery. So it's not just like, I've been diagnosed with burnout twice from working in this industry. And, it's not just something that you just, take a nap or go like take a day off. Like, this is actually something you can get diagnosed with, and that you actually need time to recover from. So the point that I wanted to make also was that in our industry, often we don't really have things that like other industries like the tech industry offer, which are mental health days, or even like any kind of recovery system in place. And I think that that's something that moving forward, hopefully our industry can explore more. Like even benefits as in general is not something that's, tends to be offered. And it's totally fine if you're working at a small bar or small restaurant, they can't really afford to offer those things, but there are ways to incorporate like a 4-day work week, or, to empower and encourage workers to not lead to burnout.
Yeah. And to your management point about people being just thrusted in these positions, another thing that, restaurants and bars are looking at to help them with, deal with this process is that there's no leadership development, you know what I mean? And also when you're talking about this is you also have to people in those leadership developments to know how to coach and know how to bring a team around. I really think the next thing is really to learn about, a team-based approach and understanding how to solve problems, build a team. And I really think that is going to help. But you hit it nail on the head. Some of these people just put in these positions, and management is a set of skills, and then leadership is just a whole nother mentality. And it can help so much, especially when we're talking about where we want to go in this industry and where we want to take it, especially the mental health conversation and dealing with these structures that's going to cause a problem as well, because when everyone's used to operating in a hierarchy structure and then you start slamming them and you start destroying these silos, communication becomes at a premium. Understanding where you are and how you impact the people around you is just paramount. So I think there's, getting some good resources and developing those trainings so those restaurants and bars can understand how it's going to impact them can help as well. Because there's going to be some collateral damage along the way. Because a lot of people have just been grown up in that kind of structure. And it's really hard when you're saying, all right, now this is how we're going to move towards it. It's also about having empathy for those type of people too. Because whenever change comes, like it's going to have good and it's going to have bad. And I think being able to look forward as we're going towards that, to just be empathetic towards everything that's going to come across the way during the journey. So, but I think that was a great point.
I want to kind of shift a little bit and talk about emotional boundaries, because we've done a really good job talking about, being vulnerable and, making as managers, making ourselves accessible to our teams and things like that. But I also want to make sure that with that vulnerability comes healthy boundaries, because the reality is that we all get very close in this industry, right? And it feels good to get close to people. At the same time, it is still a workplace, right? And I don't want managers watching today to see this and be like, I need to start absorbing all of my team's trauma, because that's not going to help them, and it's not going to help you.
No.
What you can do is create an environment in which they can voice that they need help, and then you can direct them to the resources where, to people who are therapists who can help them, or whatever that looks like. But I don't want people to see this thinking, well, I'm going to have an open door policy and I want to hear about your divorce or this, because that's not going to help you. And if you can model those healthy boundaries as well, that will help your team see what that looks like, and they can start building those boundaries for themselves in the workspace, right? So like boundaries around emotional labor with the guests is a really good one that I think we struggle with a lot. It's hard to create that boundary. What are some other things about boundaries that we can add?
I think it's safeguarding yourself is an important one. It's not something that, when I started on this journey, I wasn't really aware of safeguarding until you start taking on all that information. And some of it provides some quite graphic images in your head that you then have to process yourself. So I think it's important for anyone within the management structure that if you do have a member of staff who has experienced trauma, in whatever shape or form, however recently or back in the past, that you ask them if it's safe for you to hear it, or where your boundaries are in order to be able to protect yourself from that. And that's not to mean you have to come around harsh and shut people down quickly, but you have to be like, look, I appreciate that what you've got to say is probably quite traumatizing, and we need to find a safe space together for you to be able to discuss that. But right here and right now isn't the right time. But it's about making sure that door remains open in a positive setting, rather than actually, I'm not interested, I don't want to hear it, because that way you'll just, it will have such a detrimental effect.
No, yep. And to chime in, like what you were saying too, I think the first step for everyone is get that education. And then disperse it amongst your leaders and your staff. And then to Laura's point, you hit it nail on the head is modeling. Like we need to sit down and practice it. What does a bad conversation look like? Talk about dealing with emotionally charged situations. Talk about, this is how use personal examples how I could talk about depression. If you start modeling and start getting the conversation and people just talking about it in an open format, not calling anyone's names out, but saying, hey, this is what it looks like when it looks like it's dealt with in a terrible situation. But this is how we as a restaurant and bar, like if you have a problem with, hey, during this shift, I was depressed or something triggered me. And this is how it felt like. I feel like just doing something, and it sounds trivial, but it really makes a difference in role playing. And I'm going to just beat my hand on the table with this. Practice that behavior. And I think if you start at those 2 points, like everyone's been saying, that's the greatest starting point. And you can just start from there and get the ball rolling, and start to make people just feel comfortable. And you're gonna see that anxiety get sucked out of the room when everyone looks around. It's like, okay, they really care about being vulnerable, and I'm seeing someone be vulnerable right in front of me. I think that's the best way to teach it, is if as leaders or people that are going to be in a restaurant and bars, to just go out on a limb. And it doesn't have to be something crazy, serious, divorce or death or anything like that, but just little things. It could be within the shift. It could be, how you feel going into a shift. Those type of things, I think, can make a difference. And you can start doing those today. And I'm so glad that the resources are being held out. This conversation has gone to a great place.
Yeah, and it doesn't. Sorry, I was going to say it doesn't need to be. You don't need to do a whole PhD as a manager to be able to provide some practical tips that will be useful to your staff. If you do have a conversation with a member of staff and they're saying, I'm feeling really stressed out today, or I'm not able to cope with this situation because it's high pressure, just taking a minute of deep breathing exercises, or, even the Headspace app, or, a mindfulness app, and just saying, right, pop these headphones in, go and sit with yourself and for 3 minutes, listen to this fully, practice it, and come back and tell me how you feel, rate yourself on a scale. And just those small things, be able to take that person out of that environment for just a few minutes. It's not going to cost you any money. It's not going to detriment your labor or your service levels, but it'll allow them to get sort of a paradigm shift, a perspective on things that perhaps they wouldn't have had if they just carried on punching through that wall.
Yeah, and even putting stuff in the pre and post shift where you can say, hey, how do we communicate today? We're going to focus on communication today. What was our anxiety level look like? I used to, when I managed, is like, I would say, all right, how many times were we in the weeds? And did we gel as a team, or were we pointing fingers? Was I pointing fingers? You know what I mean? I think if you bring, critiquing yourself into the environment, people are like, okay, he's willing to throw some shade at himself. He's willing to be vulnerable, call himself out on things that I did good and bad. It makes it easier to be able to start. And those are little things. I think pre and post shift, putting it up on the board saying we are going to go into it, talking about it, and then when we're done, we're going to grade ourselves out. I think that's another great practical way that can start to make a difference and just start to tweak that culture to where,
and I want to drive home that post shift, because I've been an advocate for post shifts for a long time. I know a lot of places find them challenging to implement because, they want to make cuts, they want to send people home, they want to save on their labor. But the reality is, if it was a really stressful shift and things didn't go very well, it's like they're not going to be in a good place to process that. And usually their next stop is the bar, and then they're coping using alcohol, and then whatever went wrong in that day, everyone just wants to forget it, move on to different. You're not profiting at that point. So post shift, you can find a way to get post shift, or even like a post shift survey for people just to check in and that they have to send back if they're cut early, let's say. Highly recommend it. We have only 6 minutes left. There are a few questions. I just clicked the Q&A and I was like, ooh. So let's see. Oh, he wants to know, Benjamin wants to know where you got your shirt, Kris. Give a plug.
Oh, the shirt. Wow. Shameless plug. So the shirt is something that I introduced when I first started the Burn Chef Project to increase more conversations about it. So it's available on the Burn Chef Project website. There's front of house versions and back of house versions. And just by buying one, you support what we do. But more importantly, people go, what's that shirt about? Why is it about? And you're like, well, actually, it's because of this guy that I saw on this talk about mental health. And all of a sudden, it starts to cascade. So head over to the Burn Chef Project website and there's
another
Awesome.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to purchase one right after.
Thank you. Royal Mail's not great abroad, so just give it a few weeks.
Got you.
It will come to you.
No worries. No
Are
worries,
there
brother.
good sources for statistics on retention versus turnover costs? Yes. So Cornell, the hospitality school at Cornell did this. If I can get it this week, I'll post some other ones. There's a lot of like you'll find a lot of information in the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Also, there have been independent reports. You can even just like Google restaurant employee retention, and you'll start to see a lot of stuff come up. And in articles, even if they're just like website articles, they will usually give. Is everybody? Oh my God.
You're back.
You're back.
You're back. You're back.
All our hearts
but yeah, I'll
skipped.
try to get those posted on the Healthy Poor website as well, so that because I think implementing that in a business plan or a business restructuring, especially post-COVID, during, all of it, would be really, really helpful to show that data. What was the name of the chef that focused on staff care?
I'm just looking. I am just looking. I will find it. It's a New York chef, so leave it with me. I'll try and get it.
Do you have any tips or recommendations for people on how to open up about your mental health to your manager's leadership? I know this is something people often fear to bring up, so I think it could be a helpful topic. I agree. If you're if you're a little nervous to talk about it yourself, finding an advocate within your organization that's a little bit more comfortable talking about it, so that they can like sort of prime the conversation, go to your management and say, hey, there have been some issues that have come to me. People want to start talking about their mental health issues. Are you prepared? Oh, who's that?
Sean Brock.
Sean Brock.
Left an 8-restaurant empire to open a new venture in Nashville where the mental health and emotional balance of his staff are as essential as what's on the menu. Sean Brock, S-E-A-N.
But yeah, finding an advocate within your organization to kind of prime that conversation might be a good step.
I was also going to add, I think asking your manager. I was just going to say, asking your manager if they have ever considered, or if anyone in the company has taken mental health first aid, and if there's anyone in the company that can take mental health first aid or something like it. I know, right now, Not 9 to 5 is building a version like it for hospitality workers. It'll be coming out in the next couple months, next couple weeks. But what I wanted to say also with mental health first aid, and really with listening to anyone, Google active listening and really acquaint yourself with the difference between just listening to someone and active listening. And just remember, as a manager, you're not supposed to be treating someone for anything. You're just holding space, And I think it's really important to understand, just like if I broke my leg and I wanted your help, I would want your help calling 911. I wouldn't want your help casting me up, or doing anything to kind of heal me or treat me. So I think the same thing is not to be so scared of it and to just approach it as, being able to connect the person to the help that they need.
Yeah, exactly. 2 ears to listen, 1 mouth to talk. And so you should spend most of your time listening, and just by asking someone, as a manager, if you're watching this, if you're noticing someone isn't performing in a certain way, just ask them, how are you today? And then don't listen to their first answer or even their second, because it's usually yeah, I'm all right. How are you feeling? And then just shut up and let that space be filled. And that in itself could be more powerful than anything else.
So I went ahead and posted those resources again. Feel free to use them. Also, poke through all of those websites. There's a lot of resources and learning opportunities across the board there. On the Healthy Poor site, I posted some online learning classes about adapting to change, managing through a crisis, for example. Also, under Healthy Poor, there's a research section where you can take different surveys, things that help me to better understand the community at large, to better understand what's happening with our industry. I have 1 minute left, y'all. Thank you so much, panelists, and everybody, for tuning in. I hope that, we could probably talk about this for hours. There's so much more.
So much.
We'll find a way. But yeah, thank you so much for everybody tuning in. Thank you for giving the time and energy to this topic, because it's so needed. I always say, if you asked me 4 years ago if this would be happening, I almost want to cry right now. It's This is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. So, yeah.
No, and I appreciate
Right.
you guys
Let's
so
catch
much.
up offline. I think there's a lot we can do together, guys. Yeah.
Yeah, let's keep it moving, and I appreciate y'all so much.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Have a great tails, everybody.
Nicely done, guys.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay.
Bye.
All right.
See you guys.
Enjoy it. Peace
You
out.
too. See you guys.